Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, members of the council and guests online. Just to introduce myself, I'm the temporary chairman for this meeting of the Corporate Community Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Unfortunately, the current or the previous chairs are not in the meeting, and the substitute chairs are not available. Firstly, ask that the DS officer read out housekeeping notice regarding how this meeting will be managed, please.
Thank you. Please note that this meeting of the Corporate and Community Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. For those in the room, please note if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the car park at the front of the building. Finally, please could everyone ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on any laptops. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies for this meeting?
Yes, I've received apologies for this meeting from Councillor Broadhead, and I've also been notified of apologies for Councillor Dedman. Item 2 is substitute members, and we have Councillor Karen Rampton attending for Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 3, election of the chairman. Council presiding seek nominations for the election of chairman. All nominations must be seconded. If more than one nomination received and seconded by the the council presiding to advise the meeting, they will need to go to a secret ballot for this item. If only one nomination received and seconded, the council presiding can hand over the chairing of the meeting at this point. If more than one nomination is received, second secret ballot should be conducted. The presiding councillor to confirm the live stream has been paused and invite all councillors to write their nomination on the paper and provide a hand to the Democratic Services Officer. Okay. Thank you. Do we have any nominations for chair of this committee?
Yes, Chairman. I'd like to nominate Councillor Stephen Bartlett as chair, please.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
I'd like to second.
Thank you very much. So we have a proposer and a seconder for Councillor Stephen Bartlett. Are there any more nominations? Thank you. There's no more hands up. So therefore,
it's just asking for the microphone to go off there. That's okay. Thank you.
Therefore, congratulations, Councillor Bartlett. You are now chair, and I think I've had the shortest chairing meeting I've ever had.
Thank you
so,
very much.
thank you.
Thank you so much, members. We'll move on to agenda item 4, election of vice chair. Do you have any nominations for the vice chair? Councillor Trent?
Yeah. Councillor Sue Aikenhead.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder?
I second, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any further nominations for vice chair? No. Congratulations. Councillor Aikenhead, have I pronounced that properly? Aikenhead? Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much, members. I have to say it's actually good to be back in this seat again, and I'm looking forward to chairing this very important committee. Before we move on with the agenda, as we are a new committee, I think it would be very handy if we introduce ourselves. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just go around the members first of all, and we'll start off with Councillor Trent. If you could introduce yourself and the ward that you represent, and then we'll work around this way. Thank you.
Councillor Tony Trent, and I represent Aldney and Bourne Valley.
Hi, I'm Councillor Karen Rampton, and I'm substitute tonight for Councillor Philip Broadhead, and I'm Talbot and Branksome Woods.
Good evening, Councillor Bobby Dav, Philistine and Iford.
Councillor Oliver Walters, and I'm the Councillor for Penhill.
Councillor Michael Tarling for Christchurch Town.
Councillor Crispin Goodall for Parkstone.
Councillor Kate Salmon for Moordown.
Councillor Sue Aikenhead from Paultown.
Thank you, and I'm Councillor Steve Bartlett, and I represent Redhill and Northbourne Ward. We've got a lot of officers here this evening, and I think first of all we'll start with our Democratic Services officers. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, please. Thank you.
I'm Lindsay Marshall. I'm the Overview and Scrutiny Specialist.
I'm Claire Johnston, Democratic Services Officer and Clerk to this committee.
Okay, we have some very high-ranking people here this evening as well. We have the Chief Executive here this evening, Graham.
Thank you, Chairman. Graham Farron, Chief Executive of BCP Council.
Ian O'Donnell, I'm the Corporate Director of Resources for BCP Council.
And I'm Susan Zeiss, Director Law and Governance and the Monitoring Officer. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Sarah Radine, I'm the Director of People and Culture.
And Councillor Jeff Hanna, a portfolio holder as a member of Cabinet for Transformation.
Councillor Vicky Slade, Leader of the Council.
Hi, I'm Liz Bowman, I'm the lead on the Pay and Reward project.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest, members. Does any councillor have any disclosable pecuniary interest or any other interest on any agenda on the item on the agenda this evening? Councillor Tarling?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure it's a pecuniary interest and not sure if it comes up in the agenda, but my wife is an employee of BCP Council.
Thank you. Any more? No? Okay. Agenda item 6, minutes of the previous meeting. I'm just casting my eye around. I think I'm probably the only one that was in attendance at the last meeting. Councillor Dedman, unfortunately, is not here. She would have, I'm sure, attested to the accuracy of the minutes. I have actually read them, and I didn't find any issues with it, although there were a couple of members that amendments have been highlighted by Democratic Services. So would you like to read them out, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The issue with the minute was at clause 65, and a duplicate was included for both of the public questions which were submitted. So that will need to be replaced for question 1 in the minutes with the correct public question. There's also a minor amendment to correct the name of the questioner in the response received to the second public question. So those amendments will be made.
Thank you. So we'll take the with that amendment as the minutes having been agreed. Agenda item 7, public issues. Chairman to update or pass to the clerk for an update on the public issues. I don't believe we have any this
public
evening.
issues, no.
Thank you. Agenda item 8, overview and scrutiny annual report. So this is me to introduce it. I know that Lindsay Marshall is going to present the report to us, but I will say a couple of words about it before we get into it. And what we have in this report is really the product of 4 years worth of overview and scrutiny experience. And it really puts together some of the issues that we've had within the council since it became the unified council. I think it's an excellent report. It really hits the exact points that we need to think about, the things that we know that we need to do. And as an added bonus, we have an action plan in there. So we've got a direction to head in, which is going to be a great help to us. Anyway, I'll say no more about it in this moment. I've probably got some comments on it after we've heard the introduction and the small presentation that Lindsay's going to give us. And then we'll take questions from members. So let's take it from there. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Members may be aware that I've presented this report through the 3 overview and scrutiny committees that have met already. So I will try and keep this fairly brief, but I do want to pull out some of the key messages for you. Is this sharing? No, it's sharing in there. Sorry, we're just making sure that the report's sharing, the presentation is sharing on the screen. I'll carry on. So just to briefly outline for you the process and the purpose around the report, if you're not already familiar, it is an annual report. It picks up the last 4 years of activity for ONS in BCP, so quite helpfully the last council term as we now go into this one. The report will go through the overview and scrutiny committees and then on to council. And if I just take you to the next slide, it is a good practice to take an overview and scrutiny annual report through. It's a constitutional requirement here at BCP, and the reason it's good practice is to make sure that there's good ownership across the council from all stakeholders of the activity of overview and scrutiny, because it is the responsibility of all stakeholders to enable its success. So that's why it's being repeated so much to you in all the committees over the last week or so. And also it summarises activity that's taken place, and importantly it gives an opportunity to make recommendations for improvements, to make sure that the overview and scrutiny structure and the ways of working remain fit for purpose. So the action plan is very much looking to achieve that, and it makes recommendations for any improvements that might be required to bring us into line with the statutory government guidance around overview and scrutiny. The action plan is at Appendix 2 of your report, and the summary of activities at Appendix 1, but I'm going to assume that everybody has read the report and the background, and I won't go into much detail on that at all. Just to pull out some of the key elements that I think are really important to reinforce whenever we have an opportunity to talk around scrutiny and why we're doing it. So a reminder of the principles of good scrutiny. There are 4 widely accepted principles of good scrutiny, and those are the first 4 that you can see on the screen above. Principles 5 and 6 are ones that BCP actually added themselves because they thought it was important that scrutiny does contribute to the vision and priorities of our council, and that it's agile and is flexible in the way it works. But the first 4 priorities I think are important to reflect on, because scrutiny is more than just holding others to account. It's more than just being a critical friend, which some people may think of it as. It's also there to enable the voice and concerns of the public, and crucially to engage in decision making and policy development at an early stage. And of course it should be member led and owned. And in terms of the statutory powers of overview and scrutiny, this quote from the government guidance is quite useful. It says the role that overview and scrutiny can play in holding an authority's decision makers to account makes it fundamentally important to the successful function of local democracy. Effective scrutiny helps secure the efficient delivery of public services and drives improvements within the authority itself. Conversely, poor scrutiny can be indicative of wider governance, leadership and service failure. So just reflecting on those statutory powers, ONS has the ability to ask for information to be brought to it, to ask for people to come to it, and to hold them to account there. It can make recommendations, and it can require responses to those recommendations, both within the council and with partners such as the NHS. So it has quite far-reaching powers, and it can also look at anything that affects the
authority's area or the inhabitants of the area. So that's clearly a very wide-reaching remit. So to narrow that down into the specifics of what you want to look at in your committee that are going to make a difference is, you can see, is probably quite a difficult task. So the challenge for overview and scrutiny is how to bring all those powers together and maximise them. This is just to show you the current committee remits, and that's included within the report. It's very small there, so I won't linger on that, but this is the current breakdown of the 4 ONS committees. Just a caveat there with these is that when agreed, these were based on the previous portfolio areas within the previous council term. There will clearly need to be some refreshing of that now to make it make sense so that it's clear which portfolio is reporting to which committee. So that's a housekeeping exercise that will need to be undertaken. But the service areas remain pertinent within those 4 committees. And the key messages really that the action plan addresses, but also which are pulled out of the statutory guidance. The guidance is ever so clear that culture is the most important thing to making sure that scrutiny is successful. Very pertinent, I think, for BCP scrutiny is that we need to prioritise the work effectively, and of course adding value through your work. You invest a lot of time when you're sitting on a committee like this, both behind the scenes and in the committee room and in task and finish groups and things like that. You want to be adding some value from the work that you're putting in and that your officers here are putting into. In terms of culture, the guidance says the prevailing organisational culture, behaviours and attitudes of an authority will largely determine whether its scrutiny function succeeds or fails. While everyone in an authority can play a role in creating an environment conducive to effective scrutiny, it is important that this is led and owned by members, given their role in setting and maintaining the culture of an authority. So how everybody works together, how you work together as a scrutiny committee, as a team, how you interact with decision makers and officers behind the scenes and both in committee as well, will underpin how successful scrutiny can be. Prioritising effectively. The guidance says scrutiny members should accept that shortlisting can be difficult. Scrutiny committees have finite resources and deciding how these are best allocated is tough. They should understand that if work programming is robust and effective, there might well be issues that they want to look at that are nonetheless not selected. The message there is if you try to do too much in scrutiny and spread yourselves too thin, you are less likely to add value in what you are doing. So selecting priorities for your year should feel like a tough exercise, but it's a very important one to get right at the outset to make the most of your time. On that note, there are workshops planned for July, dates to be determined, but for all the ONS committees, so that you can get together and do a really detailed look at what you would like in your work plan moving forward. So that's the place for that discussion to take place, and that will help you to set out a plan for the whole year. But other things that might help you is to establish some key priorities for the year. So are there particular themes that are important for you as a committee, or is there a lens that you want to scrutinise everything through, such as risk or community impact? There are many ways of doing it, but the more that you can make clear your role in scrutiny and communicate that to the organisation, the more successful scrutiny is likely to be. And finally, on to adding value through your work. Effective scrutiny should have a defined impact on the ground, with the committee making recommendations that will make a tangible difference to the work of the authority. So that's a fairly obvious comment, but actually a really important one to bear in mind. When you have spent your time in committee and spent your hours preparing, what is the output that is going to make a difference to the authority or the community? What are the recommendations that are coming out of that? when going into a piece of work, if you can establish what the recommendations might be, you're going to be more likely to be looking at something that's going to add value. If it's not clear what those recommendations may be, it may be the case that you're not going to add so much value with that piece of work. And if scrutiny members are not fully prepared and able to ask relevant questions, the committee will not be able to fully interrogate an issue, and committee meetings can become little more than educational sessions for councillors to learn about a service rather than scrutinise it. I think that's quite a useful extract from the Select Committee report that came before the government guidance, and something that some experienced members will recognise, having sat in committee meetings but feeling they've learned information but not actually scrutinised something. So I think the message there is the more preparation that can be done beforehand in terms of educating yourselves through informal briefings or receiving information outside of meetings, the more the actual meeting time can be used for scrutiny, for getting underneath an issue and finding solutions where they need to be found. And a final slide for you, which you may recognise from the training that was put on a few weeks ago for all members. This slide demonstrates the level of impact that you will have in engaging with an issue according to the point at which you engage. So the further along the arrow you go, the more the influence is going to decline. If we consider engagement in a cabinet report or a policy, an NHS proposal, that would be considered around the decision is imminent box, which is the third box along. And at that point, small amendments could be made, but very little can be accommodated because that policy has already been developed and is nearly finished. To have meaningful impact, if you aim to engage in matters around the first or second box, so either you identify a need for policy to be developed because you're aware of an issue in your wards and looking at it strategically, you can see there's work to be done, or engaging in a policy as it is in its early development stage. Those are the areas in box 1 and 2 where you're going to have more influence with your time. So I think that's just a useful model to bear in mind when planning your work. Thank you for listening to those messages. I'm really happy to answer any questions.
Okay, members. Tony.
Hi, thank you. On the sort of sliding diagram, you know, an ideal thing would be to develop scrutiny around what needs to be scrutinised, but the second box down is the one that probably makes more sense when it comes to deciding what the process is, because surely you've got to have an idea that something's going to be coming up in the future to be able to think, well, that is what we need to focus on. I think the first box is ideal, but it doesn't actually make a lot of sense, because you could almost come up with anything that needs to be scrutinised, and I can come up with 100 things that need scrutinising in my opinion. But that second box does give a bit of clarity as to where we should be focusing our attention, but we should be given a reasonable notice of items which are going to be looked at, not something that's going to be looked at in a month or something. So just really wanted to...
Yeah, there's the dichotomy here between what's coming forward, what the council has decided to do, and what we have time to actually achieve as a committee, and whether those things coming through from the cabinet plan, for example, for scrutiny, are the things that can produce the best value in terms of our time, and other things that we might be able to do of our choice rather than being driven by an agenda coming from cabinet, that we may be able to add value, plan and influence earlier on in the process. But how we do that is a really fine balance, because there will be things that we have no choice in. There are statutory reports, for example, which we have to look at. We will have to look at the budget and things like that. And when you take into consideration we only have, what, another 4 meetings left for the year, you've already taken one meeting just by describing 2 two topics. So we've got to be really, really careful the way we prioritise. The other thing I would say is that what it's going to mean is if we want to do some really useful work, we're going to have to do a lot more outside of the committee, and we need to do it in an informal way. We have to gather information, informal briefs back to the committee, and we can then, you know, take those things forward. But if we are to do something meaningful, it means we're going to have to work outside of the committee and not be driven just by the cabinet agenda. So there's just some thoughts, and I'm sure that we'll be speaking a lot more about this when we have our workshop. Councillor Frampton. Karen, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Lindsay, just for clarification, at paragraph 46, it says, although ONS councillors have the right to request almost any item be scrutinised, I'm assuming that that should be any councillor, because just bearing in mind that Conservatives are the second largest group, but we have very few places on overview and scrutiny committees. So I would like to think that we also could request items be scrutinised. And just to go a bit further, my ex-pool colleagues will remember the days when we had, I can't think what it's called, was it Overview and Scrutiny Board, where the chairs and the vice chairs used to meet and used to decide which items could perhaps, there could be some cross-fertilisation between Overview and Scrutiny committees. Is that something that might be considered or not? Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely, any councillor can raise any item for consideration by this committee, and we would welcome it, of course. You know, and the other point, sorry, was?
I was just harping back to the old days of pool council when we had
yes,
a board which looked at items
and
decided where they
yes,
went.
there are meetings between the four chairs of the Overview and Scrutiny, and they will be held routinely. Then they'll decide where there are crossovers, which particular committee should be dealing with it. Sorry, I've got Councillor Tarling. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned there's 4 meetings. Should the need arise, what's the potential for extraordinary overview and scrutiny meetings?
One of the issues we're confronted with is the resource that we've got from democratic services, which is constraining. In fact, when you read the report, you can see it is an issue that will constrain some of the things that we want to do. Clearly, if there are things that come up as a matter of urgency, we also are required to be flexible, and we will have to do that when the circumstances dictate. And that has happened in the past, and we can convene emergency meetings very, very quickly, and it has happened before. And in those circumstances, then we're not constrained necessarily by the resource, because it's something that will have to be done. But as a general rule, what we've got to try to do is to schedule our meetings and be very mindful of the constraints that we have in the resources available to the committee. And this is one of the reasons I said we've got to do much more work informally outside the committee and bring that information to the committee, so we're not doing the work in the committee, you know, and we're not having presentations necessarily in this committee. It'll be here to decide on information that we've already collected one way or another. So what we've got to do is try to minimise the potential for emergency meetings or extra meetings, but if the need dictates, then we can go ahead with those, of course. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Just wanted to add, you referenced the resource impact on democratic services, and I think it's clear from the report the resource impact and issues, but I will also flag that it, of course, there's an impact on resource across the organisation. Looking at the officers here tonight, pulling in extra meetings means that there is support brought in from all across the organisation, and of course the more extra meetings are added into the calendar, the more sort of ad hoc that support is, rather than in a planned approach. And so the more you can plan ahead, the better your scrutiny sessions are likely to be in terms of getting the right people around the table, ensuring availability, etc.
Actually, I wanted to ask a question about the diagram that you've got on the screen. I don't know if you can put it back up there. Yes, that's okay, don't worry. Oh, that's okay. Yes, I just wanted to ask about the no decision planned box. Because I've noticed that quite often when there's some sort of problem to be solved, it's very tempting, if you're very short of time, to just the few people who are in charge to think of a solution and go ahead with it. So I was wondering what our potential is for scrutiny in using that box to look at things that are maybe problems that we haven't thought of the solution to yet in a slightly wider context, so that we don't have to really helping the administration to find good solutions for problems by maybe involving a wider group of people. Is that within our remit of scrutiny?
Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely. I think that's an excellent way for scrutiny to get involved. Clearly, the more the communication is there between all stakeholders and all aspects of the council, the more you can be aware of emerging issues and where you might be able to add some value. But a brilliant way for scrutiny to use its time is to interact with a policy or an issue that is developing, but almost undertake a piece of work to contribute to that. And using your powers to bring people into the room, to work flexibly. You can gather evidence, you can have evidence sessions, you can get out there on site visits, talk to people on the front line, talk to the community, service users. You can build a picture around an issue in a way that can be harder to do in some of the other more formal decision-making processes that we have. So that's absolutely an ideal way for scrutiny to use its time.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, and it's sort of some of the issues that come up. What this paper doesn't do is really show how really difficult it is to make decisions about what comes in front of this committee, and it really is difficult. And as we found in the past, that virtually every cabinet meeting was going forward as the new council formed. There was a raft of important strategic papers coming through time and time again, every meeting. And we were having to sit for hours and hours. You could not say that one report was more important than the other, because they were all really important. And I think actually we haven't got to the end of it yet. I think there's still a few more to come. But although I have to say that I think we are getting towards the tail end of it now, which hopefully will give us a little bit more flexibility about what we decide to do as a committee. And that's the point I wanted to come to. This committee will decide what it wants to do, and if we're constrained by resource or whatever, we will find a way of doing it. You know, in that regard, there are no rules. We will decide what we need to do to represent our residents, or whether we feel a need to hold the administration or the council to account, and we will find a way of doing it. And I know that the leader of the council would expect nothing less from us, because the more robust overview and scrutiny is, the better the democratic process is, and also we can show our residents that we actually are representing their interests by getting difficult issues out on the table to see how they're responded to in an open and constructive way. And that's what I hope that we're going to be able to do. So don't quote me when I say there is no rules, but we will find a way of doing it. But it will mean that we're going to have to put effort in outside of these meetings. Okay, is anybody else? Okay. Okay, let me just, there's just a couple of other things I'd just like to mention that came out of the report for me. Some of the ways of working, for example, it may be that will require subcommittees, and it's mentioned in the report, to have an overview outside of the main committee to monitor certain issues, and they'll have responsibility for looking at that, but only provided things are going okay, then that function is being looked at, and then if there's something that's cropping up, that can be brought to the main committee. So there's a possibility we could have subcommittees looking at certain issues if we decide to do that. I hope that we will be taking advantage of rapporteurs, or whatever they're called, you know, where we get a couple of people that will look into a specific issue, speak informally to officers, collect information, bring it back to the committee to see if the committee wants to take it any further. And I'm going to come back to that later on when we talk about the full plan, because I've got an idea for one, so that just to kick off and see how that might work out. One of the difficult things that the officers will find, I think, is that they get very used to scheduling an overview and scrutiny session for their report or their policy that's coming forward. In fact, they schedule it into their work pattern. You know, it goes to overview and scrutiny on that day, and there's an expectation that that will happen. And very often we can talk for hours and hours about these particular reports, and it then goes without recommendation to Cabinet or Council, and it gets approved. Now, some people would say that that's an absolute waste of effort because we haven't made a recommendation. We should not underestimate the value, although you can't, it's not a tangible value, but it is a real value of looking at those papers in detail. And when people criticise overview and scrutiny for not scrutinising Cabinet reports, you know, there is a real value in it. It's a kind of a quality assurance in a way. And I've heard time and time again in Cabinet or in full Council where the portfolio holder will stand up and say, this has gone through a rigorous interrogation for 3 hours at overview and scrutiny. They didn't come up any recommend. It must be safe. You know, doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And very often it depends how the vote goes as to whether you get a recommendation to Cabinet. But it is not wasted because it does elevate the issues and it does put it out there into the public domain, which is one of the other reasons, of course, that we sit, because it does give the public an opportunity to see what overview and scrutiny is about. So some of our officers are going to expect us to be scrutinising their reports. We may have to be hard-nosed and say, I'm sorry, but that doesn't fit in with what it is we as a committee want to do, because it may have limited value, and it obviously will take each one in its own. But I think we're probably going to have to see officers bidding for time with ONS in the same way that everyone else has to. So that's going to be some hard decision making on our behalf. Yeah, the other thing is that, and I hope is that, and I think Councillor Trent mentioned it, before we decide what we're going to do for overview and scrutiny, we need to understand what the council's going to be doing. And actually, this can be a problem. The work plan comes through the Cabinet forward plan, and my experience has shown that it can change very, very rapidly. Even the day before an overview and scrutiny, we'll see it reissued, and we'll see some completely new agenda items coming up and this sort of thing. And also reports that we expect to come forward, but we don't get them. And we then have to very quickly adjust the agenda for the meeting. So, yeah, we do have to be agile, but we don't want to tie ourselves in knots through an overly bureaucratic process of having to, in the way that we approve an agenda. You know, what's the point of, you know, somebody, let give you an example, somebody says, I want this overview and scrutiny, all good reasons and all the rest of it, then they might make that, and then it's maybe 2 months to the next meeting. So you sit in the next meeting, you decide, well, somebody wants to do this, it's a really good idea, it needs to be done, but it's, okay, where are we going to do it? Well, on the next meeting, or is that 2 months away? You know, all of a sudden you're 4 months before you've even started to think about it. So we need to be agile in the way that we do it. So we may have to start approving our agendas, etc., by email, you know, and that sort of thing. So, well, yeah, sorry, yeah, go on.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify for any newer members, particularly around requesting items to join an agenda, just to be clear on councillors' rights around that. Councillor Rampton mentioned it earlier. So any councillor has the right to request that an item be looked at overview and scrutiny, but clearly if everybody requested items for every agenda, you'd be overwhelmed. So what that means in practice is you can ask for the item to be placed on the agenda for an initial consideration and discussion for the committee to decide, do they want to look at this in more detail? and there is a form attached to your work programme item that is quite a simple form that captures the basic details for anyone wanting to propose an item. But I just think it's important that you understand that basic right as a councillor and how that works and what it means.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I'm going to almost shut up. Just one last comment, and that is the importance of this overview and scrutiny committee to the democratic process. It's a statutory requirement that the executive system that we run is supported by an overview and scrutiny committee. So we have to do this, but it's essential to our democratic process that we do it thoroughly to the best of our ability. If we don't, then the democratic process will suffer. And so the stronger we are, the more robust we are, then the more robust and solid the decisions made by full council are, and the more transparent they are too, which is also. So I'll say no more, but I'd just like to thank Lindsay for a really good report. Thank you very much for all the effort you put into that. It is a first class report, so thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. So agenda item 9, pay and reward. Okay, this is an outline report now, and what I would say is I think the report is for information and noting. And of course we are in a situation where pay and reward is under negotiation with the unions at present. So I think we're probably fairly limited on the sort of questions we're going to be allowed to ask on this. If we do have a question that, in the opinion of our monitoring officer, gets into the air of confidentiality, then we may have to take the meeting into closed session. And if we do that, if I get the nod from the monitoring officer or the chief exec or anybody else who wants to indicate, then do so. But with bearing that in mind, please be careful about the sort of things you're asking. I'll hand over. I think, is it Sarah Ray, who's introducing the report? Oh, sorry, it's portfolio holders. Sorry, I didn't get you. I forgot your name already. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Not to worry. It's going to be a relatively brief introduction from myself.
Okay.
As you will all be able to work out, I have not been involved in the preparation of the report. Too recently in post for that to be the case. But what I do want to say is, first of all, the report does show evidence of a massive amount of work that's been undertaken in the preparation and negotiations with the unions in the hope that we can get resolution fairly soon. So I want to express appreciation to Sarah and her team for all of that work. The other thing I'd like to say is that, and I did wonder whether I should be expressing it on behalf of the administration, but I think probably I should be expressing on behalf of all councillors that we greatly appreciate the work that's been undertaken by all BCP staff since the council was formed. It's a matter of inevitability that it has taken time for the pay and reward situation to be fully resolved. We hope that it will be resolved soon. We would like to see that stability for all members of staff. And we do hope that we can get resolution and agreement with unions as soon as we can. Last thing I was going to mention was the sensitivities. You have already mentioned those and the need for us to be careful about what questions are addressed. With that said, I will, if I may, hand over to Sarah.
Thank you. So the purpose of tonight's report is really to bring you up to speed with where we are in terms of the current position with the project. So I'll just take you through the report and start with the background. So in 2019, when BCP was formed, we inherited via CHUPI colleagues who joined us from the preceding councils, Bournemouth, Poole, Christchurch and Dorset. Each of them brought with them their existing pay arrangements and existing terms and conditions, and they have been honoured and protected as they should be under CHUPI legislation. Those pay structures remain in place now, and those terms and conditions. So the purpose of the project was to create one single pay structure for BCP Council and one single set of new terms and conditions and employee benefits. And that's the purpose within which we've been working over the last couple of years. Now, inevitably, the 2P situation has meant that we've inherited what could be seen as an equal pay risk, and we have a responsibility and a duty to address that risk. And the re-evaluation of all of the roles across the council gives us the opportunity to resolve those issues. So we've been working with our external partners, Corn Ferry, in the last few years, and they've supported the project by developing new role profiles which describe the work of all the roles across the council, and individual officers have been mapped to those role profiles which describe the work that they do, as I've said. So those role profiles have been evaluated using the HAY methodology, which is a widely used job evaluation scheme. And we have gone through the process of modelling a number of different pay models that might be suitable for the organisation, both in terms of the impact on staff and in terms of the financial sustainability of those pay structures for the future for BCP. We've also been in a process of ongoing collective bargaining with the recognised trade unions, that's Unison and GMB. So we've spent many meetings discussing the detailed sets of terms and conditions and employee benefits and what they might look like for the future for BCP Council. We've reached a position with them that we feel we've agreed a set in principle that we could move forward with. And in February this year, we reached the position of being able to hand over the entire offer to both of those recognised trade unions so that they could present that offer to their regional officers and to their national departments. So, for example, their equalities teams, and they could then assess and scrutinise the offer in the detail that they needed to, quite rightly. So following a period of review, the trade unions have come back to us with a number of questions that they've got about that offer. That's been quite a detailed response from them, which we've taken the time to work our way through those queries and make sure that we respond to them fully in order that we can give them the reassurance that they're seeking so that they can then proceed to the next stage of the process, which would be to ballot their members. So regrettably, until we reach the time when they feel that they have that reassurance, we're not able to move to the next stage in the process, and this has inevitably affected what we hoped would be our implementation timeline. That timeline was originally scheduled for the 1st of February next year, 2024. And we hope that we, won't be too delayed in being able to agree a future date for implementation. We're absolutely aware and recognise the importance of resolving this ASAP. We know that the staff feel, desperately like they want this position to be resolved, as do we. So we are fully committed to resolving the issues with the trade unions and continuing to work with them through the process to reach a position where they do feel comfortable to move to the next stage, which, as I said, is balloting their members. And that is the current position in terms of where we are. We hope to hear from them in the next couple of weeks in terms of their response to our response, which we hope will bring the outcome of good news, which says that they will move forward to the next stage of the process. Thank you.
Thank you. So members, does any member have any questions? I hope I didn't frighten you off too much earlier on. So. Yes, please do.
I just have a question on, sorry. All right. I have a question on number 16 on the summary of legal implications. about if you are unable to reach agreement, although I just want to first say that I really hope you will be able to reach agreement, and it does sound as though you're doing a really good job towards trying to achieve that. But I just wanted to ask a legal point on this, because it does say in number 16 that if we're unable to reach agreement, dismissal and re-engagement would legally permit a change terms and conditions. And I just wanted to check if that's actually true, because I may be wrong, but my understanding is that it is illegal to dismiss people and re-engage them, but it's a lot of companies do it all the time because actually it's really difficult to enforce that law, and it's very difficult for the employees to challenge it. But that's not quite the same as it being legal. So I just wanted to check whether that's actually correct.
Yes, very happy to. Thank you. Yeah, so where we're looking to make a change in either pay or terms and conditions for an employee, there are a couple of ways in which to do that. The first would be to, in accordance with our contracts of employment for our colleagues, would be to undertake a process of collective bargaining with the trade unions, as we have been. So that would always be our first route to follow. If in the event that we were unable to reach a position that we could agree with the trade unions as to a way forward, we would still absolutely have a responsibility to address the equal pay situation that we find ourselves with. So it would not be an option to do nothing. We would then need to look to the law to see what other options were available to us to legally change those employment contracts. So I can confirm that it is in fact lawful to dismiss and re-engage somebody on a new set of terms and conditions or pay arrangements. However, as I've said in the report, it would always be a last resort for us to reach that position, because we fully recognise that that's not a palliative process to follow. You know, that would affect the morale and the motivation of our workforce, and we would of course want to avoid that. But as I said, we do have a responsibility to address the equal pay risk and would want to resolve the situation. Thank you.
Councillor Handy, you wanted to come. I've just got Councillor Crispin had his hand up before you.
It was just to add to that answer that
Okay, can you wait? You're all right to wait. Yeah, thank you.
That the dismissal and re-engagement process is clearly one that we totally want to avoid. It's not helpful to staff themselves. It is not an easy process for them to have to go through. So for their sake, we would want to avoid it totally, and we would want to get agreement with the unions and move forward on that basis. Thank you.
Councillor Goodall.
Thank you, Chair. That was my question too, but not to worry. But I'm just curious, can you tell me what percentage of the staff are actually members of the two negotiating trades unions?
We don't actually have that information because the trade unions are not obliged to share that information with us, and although we have asked, they have not shared that information, so we don't have it, I'm afraid. But sorry, what I would just add is that the trade unions do act on behalf of the whole workforce. So regardless of whether all employees are members of the unions or not, the negotiations and collective bargaining process would apply to all members of staff.
Councillor Rampton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just wondered if there's a plan and a timescale to sort out the complications of BBML employees.
I'm not sure that I'm in a position to answer that. Yeah, sorry, so just to confirm, Councillor Rampton, that BBML sit outside of the scope for this project. So their pay arrangements are negotiated and agreed separately from BCP Council.
I can just may come back, Chair. They may be outside the scope of this particular pay and reward scheme, but I don't know how much detail I want to go into in public meeting, but that there is a discrepancy in some of the employment terms.
Could I just suggest that we can provide a written answer to you, I believe, if that's necessary? If you'd prefer to do that outside of the meeting? Or are you happy to take the question on now?
Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to just introduce you, please?
Yeah,
Please,
sorry, I
Jessica.
was sitting at the back because I arrived late. I'm Jess Gibbons, I'm Chief Operations Officer, and the BBML arm's length organisation sits within the remit of property, which sits within operations. BBML, because it is outside of the pay and reward work, I think what you're saying is the difference between what we pay BBML staff and the terms and conditions for council staff, directly employed staff. And at the moment, there isn't a plan to review that work.
Sounds like an item for scrutiny, Chair.
I'm not sure that the review and scrutiny has a remit to scrutinise a private limited company. I would certainly give it some thought, and if you'd like to fill a form in, we'll certainly consider it. Councillor Slade?
Thank you, Chair. It might just be worth mentioning there are a number of companies that the council has in its portfolio, one of which being BBML, obviously Tricuro is another one, Future Place is another one, and I have asked that there is a members' induction session about the relationships between them, how they operate, how they're funded, and I have actually put on the table a piece of work to be done. Obviously, it needs to be fitted into the appropriate priority around, the future of those various companies and the staff that sit within them, so that we've got a real understanding of all of the people who have a relationship working either directly for the council or for one of those companies. So it is something that we will be doing, but as the administration's only been in place for a couple of weeks, it's a little bit early to be scheduling that. We need to get the priorities in the right order.
Thank you, Leader. Are you content? Yes? Okay, thank you. Any other members? Okay, we'll move on. Thank you. I don't think there's much for me to summarise there. We're just hopeful that we'll get an agreement with the unions in short term and we can all move forward, hopefully. Thank you. Have you got it? Okay, agenda item 10 is the work plan as it stands at the moment. I'm hoping everybody has read it. And there are a couple of items on there already, I believe. Has anybody got any comments before we discuss it any further about what's on there at the moment?
Can I just
no? Yeah, please.
Thanks, Chair. So the current forward plan of the Corporate and Community Committee, there is one that's in existence. There's a requirement to have one in existence, but of course there is an acknowledgement that there's an entirely different group of members sat around the table now. And that's another reason for workshops to be held in July, where you will be able to look at your forward plan in depth. The current plan for this committee doesn't have anything allocated for the next meeting date, which is on the 9th of October. It does have some items that were listed on there with a date to be allocated, but I would suggest that you maybe need to take stock of those and decide at your workshop what you want to do with them. So the ask with this report today is very much to say, are there any priorities that you know of now that you want to get working on prior to your workshop to look at your items that you want to get running or that you want to identify for October?
Councillor Tarling?
Yes, Mr. Chair. There are certainly some items that I would like to discuss, but I'm happy to table them at a point before the meeting and raise through the form as requested. So I shall be doing that over the next few weeks. Sorry? Sorry, I wish to form my thoughts and opinions before presenting them to committee. So I'll do that and then present the form as recommended. Thank you.
Good. We look forward to receiving them. Thanks. And my experience is that it's been very difficult to get members to actually come forward with things that they wanted to scrutinise.
I thought I'd get in before Councillor Trent's 100 items that he was suggested earlier.
Yeah, well, there are some exceptions, of course. Well, I do actually have a suggestion, and I'm going to table it now. And it's something that's, and it's probably is a matter that most ward councillors have dealt with at one time or another, and that's the issue around blue badge holders. Now, blue badge holders, if you look at the council internet, you will see that it says that there's an expectation that it could take up to 12 weeks to get a replacement blue badge. Now, of course, the people that are most likely to need a blue badge are also the people most unlikely to be reading a computer or even using them or being able to fill the forms in online. And I've certainly had one or two instances over the years where I've been contacted by an elderly person with mobility issues, and they've been told that it's 8 to 12 weeks to get it passed, and they've only approached the council, you know, by phone maybe 2 weeks prior to, and then they're told, well, I'm sorry, you know, that there is a national requirement to take certain information, and the process does take a long time. And of course, that doesn't help people who are immobile or they have a dependent terminal illness or whatever. And it just struck me that our move towards digitised customer services is an area where we really need to think carefully about how we're going to handle some of these provision of some of these services. Now, what I would like to do is, I don't know the extent of the difficulty that you know, our residents have with this, but I would like to conduct an informal inquiry into this particular issue, gathering information to see, you know, is there a problem there? Is there not a problem? You know, and then bring it back to this committee to decide if we want to take that matter forward. Now, these are the sorts of issues that I hope that we're going to be able to look at. We're looking at overview and scrutiny through the lens, if you like, this lens of service provision to our residents. And that's one thing I hope that we can really focus on. It's an area that we can make a difference if we get in early, shape the policy, maybe assist those that are constructing the customer service digital services. And that, so now I'm actually going to volunteer to be on that group, and I need at least one more volunteer to help me with that. Well, look, we've got loads of people. I think Tony was the first one to put his hand up. So would you like to join? There's both Mike and yes, go on, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I was actually going to make a point. I declared an interest at the start of the meeting, and I didn't know this was going to come up, but I have a second interest to declare. I get to hear about blue badges at least 1, 2, 3 times a week. My wife works for BCP Council customer facing in Christchurch Library, and has made many comments about that librarians do get involved in assisting with blue badge applications. Quite often because there isn't a relevant customer service rep of another persuasion from BCP to deal with it. So they are very used to assisting the residents when they come into a place like Christchurch Library as a point of contact for that. The other point I would make is that one of the challenges is that most residents that I'm aware of probably aren't aware of their contact place. The fact that obviously we still get people turn up to the Civic Centre in Christchurch looking to get a blue badge and then obviously read a sign, and then obviously going online isn't the answer for some people, and hopefully they get redirected to the library where there is a customer service hub at the moment. So there's a whole piece of work to do with there about informing our electors as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if your car tax runs out, you get a letter from the government telling you, don't you? But if you need a blue badge replacement, you don't get anything. You know, it's up to the blue badge holder. And if you don't have the information or can't access the information that informs you, and in today's, today, would you really think it's reasonable to actually start planning something like that 3 months in advance, or at least 3 months in advance, because that's how long the process will take? I know these are the sort of questions. Now, there may be very good reasons why it does take that, and maybe there is a way we can improve it in some way. I don't know. But can I just go back to who we should, you volunteered, Councillor Tarling. Yes, please do, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to say that I really welcome you raising this issue, and also to just say that I too receive regular contact from residents, but on a variety of topics around how they access services and whether they can access, how good their access to online services is, really impacts how well they can receive council services. And so I'd really welcome a slightly wider remit for a look at how whether our residents are well enough aware of how to access council services and whether they have sufficient options that aren't just online for the significant proportion of people across the conurbation who don't either have low IT skills or have no access to computers. So I'd be interested in that slightly wider remit.
Absolutely, and I know that this is well on in the eyesight of the transformation programme team. It's certainly a thing that has been talked about for quite some time. I think we will certainly put that on the agenda, and if you'd like to just fill one of those forms in, and we'll consider it, and we can talk about it at the workshop. But for the time being, I want to get one small issue, or it's not a small issue, it's a big issue for a lot of people, that we can actually, because I want to see if we can work informally and do this in a way that I sort of described earlier on. So I think, if you don't mind, I don't think we need more than 3 of us on it. So the 3 of us volunteers.
Yes, Councillor Bartlett, I'm happy not to be involved in it if other councillors wish to step forward. I was just making a point about my experience of the point you raised. Thank you.
Councillor Salmon, are you happy to work on this then? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So it's the 3 of us then, and Tony as well. Yeah. Go on. I know Councillor Rampton, you want to come back on something, but could you just let Councillor Trent?
Yeah, I was just really following up the question from Councillor Salmon, because I think the statistic, and it surprised me that the statistic was very similar in the 2021 census as it was in the 2011 census, that there's seems to be a third that don't have, well, in fact, 10 years ago it might have been a third that didn't have access to online. I think it's a third that don't have adequate access to online. And if you look into one aspect of it, you are actually effectively looking into other aspects of it. And I think one of the first things such a working group should do is perhaps speak to customer services staff to find out what inquiries they get. Because I know that we went through a problem a couple of years ago with green bins. The system was being changed over, it was broken down, but I found myself spending an entire day being effectively a frontline council officer, taking the matter up, sort of sending out the emails and so on. It was quite good because I actually got a good win out of it. I managed to sort something out in 45 minutes, which, someone's been eternally grateful since. But, it is something that we do need to look into, understand, and find how they work. And also, I think the other aspect that you mentioned was the emergency blue badge thing. And actually, if someone has got a serious illness, they're not going to be around for long, but they can still get around, sort of thing, and they need help, actually having to go through the same process that who's going to have a permanent blue badge goes through is unfair. I think we need a sort of a speedy version of the
let me
process.
I'll just come in on that, if I may. That there is an accelerated route for those circumstances. Councillor Rampton, sorry to keep you waiting.
That's okay, thanks, Chair. I actually really wish I was on your committee because this is a subject very close to my heart. And I'm just going to throw my tuppence halfpenny in because I've had a lot of people get in touch with me over the years about the blue badges. And I think the problem is that it is outsourced. And I think it's a massive source of frustration to our officers who do a blooming good job when you contact them, that it's kind of out of their hands once it's been sent off. And I think one of the main problems for me is that you have to go through the same process in the same length of time, whether it's a renewal or a new application. Now, I had somebody recently whose daughter was actually, the badge had run out. They were waiting for weeks and weeks and weeks for the new one. Probably part of that was communication. They didn't know that they should have applied earlier, but they had waited several months. That person had cerebral palsy. Well, she'd had it from birth. She wasn't going to get better. She wasn't suddenly going to be able to get around. So I think looking into it, if there could be some, and I don't know if this is possible, but some sort of a temporary badge for people who have a long, a lifetime condition. So at least they've got something that they can use until I understand the checks and balances have to be done, but something that they could use until that comes through, because 12 weeks is absolutely appalling. People shouldn't have to wait that long.
Thank you. Just a minute, Councillor. Yeah, I've actually already had a discussion with customer services, and they actually would welcome our investigation, and they identified some of the issues you just mentioned yourself to me, so they're well aware of some of the issues. Councillor Dell, thank you.
Thank you. I was just looking at point 12 of actually the overview and scrutiny and report in terms of where we can go and how we can carry out these deep dives. I think what I'd like to impress upon you is it's great that you've got the two members looking at this, is that we consider stakeholders so that when we have the report come back to us, I know we all have emails, but actually I think the first inquiry would be with someone like Access Dorset or DOTS and say, actually, how are you finding and what is it? Is it just the online system or is there more? Because if we're going to do this, let's do it really, really well, and I'm sure that you will, Chair. But I would really welcome any report that we see to have that input and the end user experience as well.
Yeah, I think the initial stage is the information gathering to see what the situation actually is and, where the hold-ups are and etc. And then for this committee, with a written brief from the informal information, then deciding what they believe the next step and whether they believe it should be taken. And that needs a broader discussion with other stakeholders. And absolutely, those are the sort of associations, groups that I think we should be talking to. And I think we also ought to ask every one of the councillors how many inquiries they get in this to put some kind of, that we can quantify it in some way as well. Okay, so it sounds like we're sort of in favour of that. We've got some volunteers and we can bring a report back, I think, in October. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, what I'm proposing is the rapporteur type thing, very informal, very no input necessary from democratic services, just a written brief from those gathering the information. So,
Can I just clarify? Just to be really clear, democratic services, of course, very happy to assist with any inquiries in that respect. But I think what you're suggesting is almost in the past, if you have considered whether you need to look at an issue, you might ask for an officer briefing paper on that. You're trying to circumvent that process by doing that work in a member-led approach, informally yourselves. Yeah. You can be more agile. You don't have to wait for the report lead-ins, and you can gather some information and you can share that offline and then establish whether it's an item that needs to join your work plan formally. So you could establish a section of your work plan for any informal work you're doing on this basis. Okay. But in this sense, it's member-led.
Yes.
Yes.
100%.
Fine. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course it may well end up us asking for an officer report, but we've got a step to get through before we get to that position.
Just wanted to be clear on that.
Monitoring officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify for Councillor Tarling's sake that his wife's employment doesn't preclude him from involving himself in this particular scrutiny. Thank you.
Sorry, apology. It doesn't preclude me from. Thank you.
I just have a couple of.
Doesn't.
No, but sorry. I was going to say, yeah, but for an easy life at home, I'm going to preclude myself from this discussion. Thank you.
That's fair enough. It's just that if we were having a discussion about your wife's benefits from her employment, like pay and things like that, then that might be something where you wouldn't be able to take part. But I don't think it applies. That interest is only a personal one, and I don't think it applies in that way for this particular item. Thank you.
Okay, we just have one more from Vice Chair, and because we're due to finish by 7:30. So.
Just a question, actually. Well, just trying to work out how things work. There's we have got the forward plan that's here. I understand that was done before, but there are one or two items on it that I just wondered how do we bring that? Do they come forward at particular times? So, for instance, the crime and disorder scrutiny report says it's statutory requirements. So, is there a particular meeting that comes to, or is that something we can do next time because it's because we know that we've got to do it? And also, I just wondered about, there was one where it says there was a request made for an update item on the disposal of assets. So that sounds very important. And I just wondered if either of those two issues were things we could bring forward next time on the basis that they've got to be done or they're quite important.
Well, I think I can answer this. The statutory requirement, it is a statute that has to be done annually. It's up to us when we do it, when the report is available. But as long as we do it, and we will do it as near to the annual. I think it was later in the year, yeah. Yeah, but we'll do it as close to the report being issued as we can. But you know, this is one of the problems already. You know, you've got half of one meeting taken up already on a statutory report. You put onto that, say, the MTFP, the medium-term financial plan, comes out. Clearly, we've got to keep an eye on the finances, the way they're being managed. So we've got to focus on that. So you know, this is where it starts getting difficult already. Some of the other items, what I suggest we do is wait till we have our workshop and then review this list completely, because there are some things, for example, the asset thing. I know that there's now a working group looking at this, and I'm not sure it was in existence when this was added to the forward plan. And I think it was the leader probably that asked for that working group to be constituted. Yeah, please, leader.
Yeah, just to clarify that that is a cross-party working group that met last Friday, and that working group will make a recommendation about which assets it considers are suitable to be disposed of. That will obviously come through cabinet, so it may be, depending on the timeline of that meeting, that you actually want to scrutinise that anyway, so you might not need to have a separate item on it. So, but it probably, I'm sure Lindsay will be able to advise what the timelines of the two pieces of work would be.
Thank you, leader. And already, members, you can see it starts to build up, because you couldn't argue that that's not an important issue. But bear in mind, of course, a cross-party group will already been looking at it very, very closely with some very, very good financial officers that we have, you know, and so you have to, sometimes you're going to have to say, I'm sorry, we haven't got the time to do that. I'm not saying we would in that particular instance, but yes, Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, the subject I was going to talk about was actually related to one of those that I was going to put on the agenda. So, but as Councillor Slade has just pointed out, there is actually another working group going on, so it'd be a bit premature to discuss or scrutinise the output of regarding asset disposal when there's a working group working on it at the moment. So again, it's one of these things about the timing on the step thing. Yes, it's good to have it flagged up that we wish to scrutinise it, and that's probably what I will put on the form. But the timing, I think, is quite crucial, because we don't want to preempt the work of that working group.
Okay, thank you. Was there anybody else? Members? Okay, I think we're just about done then, which is perfect because it's 7:30. So date of next meeting is, I've written it down, 9th of October. I wrote it down, I've lost it already. 9th of October. So if there's no more members, thank you very much, and thank you officers for attending. Thanks so many people. Thank you.